Hey there everyone, Steve the Amateur Historian here, coming to you from right smack dab in downtown Portland. I think I'm on 6th Avenue? Yeah. And I got a crazy one for you. This is actually going to be a two-part video because while I was researching this stuff, I had no idea it was going to come to this. There were actually two major murder cases that happened less than 2 weeks apart, and as I was looking at them individually, I didn't think there was going to be any correlation, just they kind of happened around the same time. But while I was researching the second one that will be addressed in the second part of this video, I realized there might actually be a connection between the two of them. But first things first, I need to accept the fact that I'm done taking a rest, and I need to get over to Southwest 1st and Morrison Street, because that's where this whole thing's going to begin on a new episode, two-parter of Historic Murders of Portland. And so I'm coming to the vicinity of where the first case in this piece occurred. There was a pawn shop, merchant shop, kind of both words were used. They were very similar, places where these people would sell individual trinkets and whatnot. They were very prevalent in what is now Portland's Old Town area. And there was a particular guy named Nathan Woolf, who in 1908 ran his own shop, and it was located near the southwest corner of 1st and Morrison, which this intersection right here is 1st and Morrison, and this is the southwest part right here. So what was the Nathan Woolf merchant shop, which based on where the address kind of marks it, I think it said it was technically at a 1st Avenue address, so the entrance would have been probably fairly comparable with the entrance to this parking garage right here. But yeah, this would have been where his shop was located. And as things begin, it's approximately 6:30 p.m. the evening of May 1st, 1908. There's a gentleman, went by the last name of Dubois, who worked really close to where this merchant shop that Nathan Woolf ran right over here was located. I think he was a cook, so for all I know, he could have worked. These buildings date back to the 1870s, this building dates back to the 1880s, so these would have been here. It's possible Dubois may have worked in one of these buildings, but he recalled walking down the sidewalk here, passing Nathan Woolf's business and looking inside and seeing someone standing behind the counter who wasn't Nathan Woolf, and he just presumed this was an employee of his, went about his day. Well, at roughly that exact same time, Nathan Woolf was being brutally murdered, so the presumption is reached by many that this gentleman that Dubois saw behind his counter, literally right here in this vicinity, was probably Nathan Woolf's killer, this guy he saw behind the counter. And it seems what this guy did was, God, it is very ominous in here. This is a very ominous parking garage. But this is, I mean, I'm standing, the counter that the killer was seen at could have been right here. I don't know. And in this vicinity, it seems, guy came in, probably asked Nathan Woolf if he could see a certain item, and when Woolf went to get it, this guy attacked. And it seems like he was led to the back room of his business, which would have been this way that I'm walking. And God, I'm worried I'm gonna get mugged. This is the most ominous parking garage I've ever seen. So it seems he was led to the back room and this guy attacked, and Nathan Woolf was so brutally, violently murdered that the authorities didn't know exactly how it went down. At first, they didn't know if he was stabbed, shot, what. It was thought that he probably was attacked with an axe. They found like a broken axe handle there, but it was just a horribly, gruesomely violent murder. Sent this whole town just shaking. And, you know, nobody knew who it was. And he would ultimately be found later, obviously dead, in the back area of his shop, which again could have been right in this general area as his building was here. And yeah, shook this city to its core. It was such a brutal crime. And it ultimately came to the authorities' attention that there was a guy by the name of Edward Martin who he wasn't a cocaine addict. They didn't use that terminology back then. He was described as a cocaine fiend, but he was a cocaine addict. He was in his mid-30s. He was a scatterbrained individual, and most suspiciously, within 24 hours of this crime happening, Edward Martin just vanished, like he split town. And it's so tragic what happened right here. Like so many, you know, people that fall victim to crimes like this. And Nathan Woolf was a guy, hadn't bothered anybody. He had a family, he had kids. He had 4 kids. I did notice, and this probably, you know, if you believe in this kind of stuff, this probably didn't help his cause, but his address at the time, it would be a different address now, but he lived at 666 Kearney Street. 666 Kearney Street. And shortly after Nathan Woolf's murder, there was a man seen in Harrisburg, Oregon, which is probably about 90, 100 miles south of the city. And he was seen selling like jewelry and random trinkets and the kind of things you'd find in like a pawn shop. And one of the things that people in the city noticed was he didn't have a collar on his shirt. Now this is prominent. Whether this guy was involved or not, there was a collar from a shirt discovered in the pawn shop, and that was deemed a pretty important piece of evidence. Look out for a guy who's roaming around without a collar on his shirt. And ultimately, after being on the lam for a few days, on May 5th, 4 days after Nathan Woolf was killed, Edward Martin was finally tracked down in a rooming house on Union Avenue, just across the river, literally right across the river on the other side. And when they found them, they arrested him. They found him to have a mark on his forehead that they thought might have been the result of contact, like with an axe. Like, say, he struck Woolf with an axe, which again was kind of the theory, and then maybe as they were struggling, it came back and hit him. And he also had scratches on him, possibly the result of, you know, attacking someone. There were defensive wounds back on him. And of course, he you know, had every excuse in the book. I think he blamed the scratches on a cat, and I don't even remember what he blamed the dent on his head for, but of course, once he was apprehended, suspicion fell on him pretty quickly. But it wasn't just that he was a cokehead. It wasn't just that he had marks like he'd been fighting someone. There was another thing that happened that actually brought a lot of attention on him. And so upon his apprehension, any hope that Edward Martin had of not being deemed the guilty party kind of started falling apart. His wife certainly didn't help his cause. She claimed that he had gone out the night of the murder and was supposed to come back, never came back, claimed he got held up. Then he, you know, changed the story and said he went to a poker game and a fight broke out and some guy hit him with a chair. That was the reason for the mark on his head and I guess maybe the scratches. And then there's also this story that his wife gave that they were out walking just a couple days after, a day or two after the Nathan Woolf murder, and as they're passing by, his wife directly asked him, like, were you a part of this? And he said something melodramatic, like, you know, I'd assume jump in the river and kill myself than to have you think I would be involved in something of that nature. And another thing, kind of the biggest thing that I think really didn't help Edward Martin was when he was apprehended, he had a coat with him. And it became apparent pretty quickly, people were claiming that the coat he was wearing was Nathan Woolf's coat. So, you know, you have to wonder, was this guy coked out of his mind when he did this? Why would he take a dead man's coat and wear it around town? You know, you'd figure he's trying to lay low. Why would you take another piece of property from someone after killing them that you can get seen around town wearing and get the finger put on you? But hey, I don't claim to understand how this guy was thinking. The day after the killing, while we're talking about clothing, garments, there was a bloody shirt found, I can't remember if it was inside or near a rooming house, described as being on 2nd Avenue on the north end, which could mean Old Town right through here. It could have been in Chinatown, but kind of off over in this area. You know, and that was believed to have belonged to the killer. Were probably, there'd be about a, I don't know, 7-8 block distance, but you know, whoever the killer was, whether it was Martin or anybody else, could have traversed that distance in 10 minutes, although you think he would have been seen in a bloody shirt and people would have gotten suspicious. But as it stands, you have a coat, you have a bloody shirt, you have all these things pointing to Edward Martin. And there was even a woman who came out and stated that she sold him, or gave him a gun, shortly before the murder happened, and that she was under the presumption that he was going to use it for target practice or something benign like that. So there's a lot of stuff piling up against Edward Martin. And so by the end of the month, Martin is put on trial. But it is interesting, for all of these things indicating him that the gun he potentially, you know, recently took control of, ownership of, what have you, the coat, the bloody shirt, all this stuff, his going into hiding, as it seemed. When he went on trial, there were things that were brought up that suggested that maybe he wasn't the guilty party. This included the fact that, you know, it was very circumstantial. It seemed all the prosecution's witnesses were very shaky. Some of them, the guy had supposedly sold Martin this shirt. He just kind of vanished and was just gone. Didn't show up for court, as I understand it. He also said that the case that the gun supposedly was in had no blood on it. And, you know, had Martin done what he supposedly did, he would have had blood all over him, possibly blood on the weapon. There would have been at least some trace amount on there. And there was nothing. But it seems, you know, the objective against this guy was so strong that despite all these questions, inconsistencies, he wasn't really going to get off. And he was ultimately charged for the crime, and he was given a 16-year sentence. That was they almost immediately tried to put it on appeal for all these interesting circumstances. But as I last read on Martin, those appeals all fell through, and he ended up doing the time. And it's interesting because there was another guy that came up in relation to this case in the aftermath, a guy named Joe Botkin. And now Botkin was apparently part of this group of people that were jealous of Nathan Woolf. Apparently Nathan Woolf had a little bit more success than these other guys did. And Botkin is another guy who just mysteriously, conveniently vanished from the Portland area altogether. I mean, at least Edward Martin kind of stayed in the city. Joe Botkin vanished right after Nathan Woolf's murder happened. And when he left, there was these interesting, bizarre ciphers that were found left in a box at the place where he was living before he split town. And police were trying to solve these. They were honestly wondering if maybe there was something in connection to Nathan Woolf's murder that was in these ciphers. Do we have the wrong guy? But it never seemed like they were able to figure out what those ciphers said. So he was off in another country, and hey, we have Edward Martin. We'll just say he did it. And as we push to concluding matters here, it seems like this was maybe an open and shut case. You have a guy who's a drug fiend, but that kind of makes him an easy target. And the last thing you really hear about the Nathan Woolf case is Edward Martin being sent up for it. But it's real easy, real convenient to just say this guy's a cocaine addict, so he's capable of anything. And so it's kind of a case that's, you're a little bit suspicious. Did they just try to put this on him? Was he a convenient target because he all of a sudden vanished right after the crime happened? And while that is not alone make anybody guilty of anything, it's suspicious. And it's interesting things I found in the newspaper, like for instance in relation to the caller. News reports posted on the same day from the same newspapers would initially say, we found this caller, we have no idea who it is. They even found a laundry tag on it, couldn't figure out who it belonged to. And then later on they'd say, they implied like they knew who the caller belonged to, because they started saying that this caller belonged to an individual of ill repute. And in articles that would discuss this as an unsolved murder, we don't know who the suspect is, they would include, like, what was one of the things, in a report from May 5th, so a couple days after the crime, they still don't know who did it. It said, it was expressed that the arrest of a man believed to be the murderer is expected to occur within hours of, the publication of that paper. And that's interesting because it seems they didn't even have any idea of who this suspect was, but it was presumed imminent that an arrest was going to happen. It was all very cryptic, like the authorities were saying, we know who it is, we're going to go bust him. But it was like they didn't really quite have the goods on him, so they wouldn't say who it was or any of this stuff. So there's some things that are a little suspicious and a little problematic in this case. But what is most interesting in regards to concluding part 1 here is only 12 days later, May 12th, 1908, a merchant, guy who worked similar business as Nathan Woolf, was beaten mercilessly with what was called a gas pipe. He was one of multiple people attacked with such an item. And he, like Nathan Woolf, succumbed to his injuries. And what's interesting is the man who was brought under suspicion for that case just happened to be sitting with a friend one night. This is obviously between when Nathan Woolf was killed and this merchant on May 12th. And they were talking about the Nathan Woolf crime. And his friend said to him, whoever did this, he must have been a lunatic. And this guy, who would later come under suspicion for these gas pipe crimes, a guy named Jack LaRose, would reply back, you'll find out pretty soon, I'm paraphrasing, you'll find out pretty soon that the guy that did this isn't insane. It's very suspicious.